Captain Maya Johnson's uniform soaked with coffee as passengers gasped. The flight attendant smirked, whispering, "Your kind belongs in coach." Maya's fingers trembled, dialing a number nobody expected. Within minutes, armed officers boarded. "This plane isn't going anywhere," they announced. "Where are you watching from today?" Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination and justice, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. How would you react if you witnessed this incident on your flight? Let's find out what happened when this decorated soldier refused to accept discrimination at 30,000 feet. Captain Maya Johnson had spent the past 14 years proving herself. As a black woman in the United States Army, every achievement required twice the effort, twice the excellence, and twice the composure of her white counterparts. Today should have been different. Today should have been her moment of vindication. At 34, Maya's military record spoke for itself. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Purple Hearts, and now, a presidential commendation for extraordinary heroism after she had led an evacuation mission that saved 43 civilians during an insurgent attack. The ceremony at the White House was scheduled for tomorrow morning, a career-defining moment that would finally silence the doubters who had followed her since basic training. Maya had grown up in Charleston, South Carolina, raised by a single mother who taught mathematics at an underfunded public school. Sandra Johnson had instilled in her daughter 2 core principles. Excellence was non-negotiable, and dignity was her birthright. These principles had carried Maya through West Point, where she'd graduated in the top 5% of her class, and through her subsequent military career. "Remember who you are," her mother had told her on the phone that morning. "You wear that uniform because you've earned it. Every medal, every rank, every honor." Maya had spent 3 hours preparing for her flight from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. Her dress uniform was impeccable, every crease sharp, every button polished, every medal precisely placed. She had rehearsed her acceptance speech in the mirror until the words flowed naturally. The military had arranged her travel, including a first-class ticket on Delta Airlines Flight 2437, acknowledging the importance of her arrival in pristine condition. As Maya boarded the plane, she immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere. First-class passengers, predominantly white business travelers, glanced up with expressions ranging from surprise to unmistakable displeasure. A middle-aged white man in a tailored suit audibly sighed as she approached her seat in the 3rd row. Another passenger whispered something to his companion, who stifled a laugh behind her hand. Flight attendant Barbara Reynolds, a stern-faced woman with precisely styled blonde hair and approximately 52 years of life, etched into the lines around her eyes, approached as Maya settled into her window seat. "Ticket, please," Barbara demanded, despite having already scanned Maya's boarding pass at the entrance. Maya handed it over without comment. Barbara examined it, flipping it over as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "This says first class," Barbara stated, her tone suggesting an impossibility. "Yes, it does," Maya replied evenly. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? 3A? "I am certain, thank you." Barbara's lips tightened as she handed back the boarding pass with 2 fingers, as if reluctant to touch it. "Very well." As pre-flight preparations continued, Maya observed Barbara's interactions with other passengers. The flight attendant smiled warmly at the businessman across the aisle, inquiring about his comfort and offering a pre-departure beverage with genuine hospitality. She joked with an elderly white couple, complimenting the woman's scarf and addressing them as Mr. and Mrs. Patterson after a single glance at their boarding passes. When Barbara returned to Maya's row, her demeanor transformed. No smile, no eye contact, just a curt seatbelt, before moving on without waiting for Maya's drink request. Maya took a deep breath. This was nothing new. Throughout her military career, she had encountered similar treatment, subtle dismissals, assumptions that she didn't belong in officer quarters, questions about whether she was really a captain. She had learned to pick her battles. Today, with the White House ceremony hours away, was not the day for confrontation. The cabin filled as coach passengers filed past. Maya noticed several double takes from travelers spotting her uniform in first class. A young black woman in Air Force fatigues gave her a subtle nod of respect. Maya returned it, feeling a familiar pang of responsibility. Every Black service member carried the additional burden of representation, their individual actions scrutinized and extrapolated to reflect on all Black military personnel. As the boarding process neared completion, Maya realized she had been overlooked for the pre-flight beverage service. With a 5-hour flight ahead and her throat already dry from airport air, she pressed the attendant call button. Barbara appeared quickly enough to suggest she'd been watching for it. "Is there a problem?" Barbara asked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, implying that Maya was being difficult. "No problem at all," Maya replied with military calm. "I'd like a coffee before takeoff, please. Black, no sugar." Barbara's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "We're about to close the cabin for departure." "There seems to be time," Maya observed, nodding toward another flight attendant still serving drinks 2 rows ahead. "Fine," Barbara said, walking away without another word. Maya turned to look out the window, focusing on her breathing. Just a minor unpleasantness, nothing worth disrupting her important day. The ceremony awaited. President Adams would shake her hand. Her mother would be watching. "Keep perspective," she told herself. When Barbara returned, she carried a steaming cup of coffee without a napkin or a saucer. As she extended it toward Maya, something shifted. Later, multiple passengers would debate whether what happened next was intentional or accidental. The coffee cup tilted. Scalding liquid cascaded directly onto Maya's immaculate uniform and lap. Maya gasped as the hot liquid seared through the fabric onto her skin. "Oh!" Barbara exclaimed with theatrical surprise. "How clumsy of me!" The coffee formed an expanding dark stain across Maya's chest, soaking her metals, running down to her lap where it pooled in agonizing heat against her thighs. Years of military discipline prevented her from crying out despite the pain. "Let me help you with that," Barbara said, grabbing a thin cocktail napkin and dabbing ineffectually at the uniform. She leaned close, and in a voice meant only for Maya whispered, "Your kind belongs in coach." The words hung in the air between them like poison. The searing pain of the coffee burn paled in comparison to the scorching humiliation of Barbara's words. Maya sat perfectly still, coffee dripping from her soaked uniform as the flight attendant continued her performance of concern. "These things happen," Barbara announced loudly for the benefit of onlooking passengers. "I'm sure your uniform will clean up just fine." Maya's military training kicked in. Assess the situation, control emotional response, determine appropriate action. The coffee had soaked through her jacket, shirt, and pants, burning her skin underneath. Her carefully arranged medals were now stained and disarranged. The speech notes in her pocket were ruined. And more devastating than all of this was the deliberate nature of the assault and the racist sentiment behind it. "I need your employee number and full name," Maya stated calmly, despite the adrenaline coursing through her body. Barbara's performative concern vanished instantly. "Excuse me?" "Your employee identification number and full name," Maya repeated, "for my complaint to your employer." Across the aisle, a young white man in his 30s, later identified as Carson Miller, discreetly positioned his phone to record the interaction. His marketing job had taught him to recognize significant moments as they unfolded, and his conscience wouldn't allow him to simply watch in silence. Barbara straightened, her face hardening. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm requesting standard information for a customer complaint." "You're being aggressive," Barbara said, raising her voice. "I've apologized for an accident, and now you're creating a scene." 2 other flight attendants approached, drawn by the commotion. Without asking what had happened, they flanked Barbara protectively. "Is there a problem here?" asked the taller one, a man with a military-style haircut and a name tag reading Kevin. "This passenger is being aggressive after an accidental spill," Barbara explained before Maya could speak. "That's not accurate," Maya began, but Kevin cut her off. "Ma'am, we need everyone to remain calm during boarding. If you have an issue, you can submit it through customer service after the flight." The third flight attendant, a younger woman, named Tara, looked uncertainly between Barbara and Maya, noting the coffee-soaked uniform and the unmistakable military decorations. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but she remained silent. Maya took another steadying breath. I have been assaulted with hot coffee, accompanied by a racist comment. I am requesting the flight attendant's identification, as is my right as a passenger. Barbara gasped theatrically. Racist? I have never been so insulted in my 23 years of service. She's making that up because I accidentally spilled coffee. The commotion drew the attention of the flight captain, who emerged from the cockpit still securing his tie. Captain Richard Whitman, a former Air Force pilot with a commanding presence, surveyed the scene with obvious annoyance. What's going on here? He demanded. Barbara immediately turned to him, eyes brimming with manufactured tears. This passenger is making horrible accusations after an accident, Captain. She's threatening me and disrupting the flight. Captain, Whitman glanced at Maya, taking in her coffee-soaked uniform with barely concealed impatience, rather than the professional respect one military officer might show another. Captain, Maya began, noting his former military rank on his nameplate. I'm Captain Maya Johnson, U.S. Army. I don't care if you're General Patton, Whitman interrupted. You're causing a delay to our departure. Either calm down and accept the flight attendant's apology, or I'll have you removed from this aircraft. The first-class cabin had gone silent. Every passenger was watching now. Carson Miller's phone continued recording, capturing everything. Sir, Maya said, struggling to maintain her composure, your flight attendant deliberately spilled coffee on me and made a racist comment. I am exercising my right as a passenger to file a complaint. She said what? The elderly woman across the aisle, Mrs. Patterson, suddenly interjected. I heard her mutter something but couldn't make it out. This is ridiculous, Barbara snapped. I've never been accused of such things in my life. Captain Whitman raised his hand for silence. Last warning, the incident is over. We're preparing for departure. Any further disruption, and you'll be deplaned. Is that understood, Captain Johnson? The emphasis he placed on her rank carried unmistakable mockery. Maya felt a familiar sinking in her stomach, the realization that the system was once again aligning against her. Her perfectly planned journey to Washington was derailing before her eyes. The White House ceremony suddenly seemed in jeopardy, all because she had dared to request coffee while black in first class. As the standoff continued, Maya's mind flashed back through similar moments in her military career. The commander who had consistently passed her over for promotion until a review board intervened. The fellow officer who had spread rumors that she had only advanced through affirmative action rather than merit. The countless times she had been mistaken for administrative staff rather than a combat officer. Each time, she had persevered through a careful balance of asserting her rights while navigating an unfair system. Each time, she had emerged stronger but carrying new invisible scars. This time felt different. The stakes were higher. Her career milestone moment hung in the balance, and the injustice was happening so blatantly, in front of dozens of witnesses. Understood, Maya finally said, not in surrender, but in tactical retreat. She needed time to consider her options. Captain Whitman nodded curtly and returned to the cockpit. Barbara shot Maya a triumphant look before instructing the other attendants to prepare for departure. No one offered Maya towels for the coffee, assistance with her burned skin, or even acknowledgement of her discomfort. As the cabin crew moved away, Maya sat in her soaked uniform, the liquid now cold against her burned skin, calculating her next move. The ceremony was less than 18 hours away. If she pushed further now, she risked removal from the flight and might not make it to Washington in time. If she remained silent, she accepted a humiliation that cut to the core of her identity as both a soldier and a black woman. The choice crystallized in her mind. This wasn't just about her anymore. Maya sat motionless in her coffee-soaked uniform as the flight attendants continued their pre-departure routine. Barbara moved through the cabin with deliberate normalcy, avoiding Maya's row entirely. The burning sensation on Maya's skin had subsided to a persistent sting, but the humiliation remained raw and immediate. Should she let it go? The rational part of her brain made the argument. The White House ceremony represented the pinnacle of her career. Was this incident, however unjust, worth jeopardizing that moment? She had endured worse discrimination and still accomplished her missions. Perhaps this was another test of her professionalism, her ability to prioritize duty over personal injury. But another voice, equally powerful, reminded her of her mother's words. Dignity is your birthright. Sandra Johnson had taught mathematics in segregated schools before integration, then in underfunded schools afterward. She had instilled in Maya the understanding that accepting injustice only ensured its continuation. Are you all right, dear? The gentle question came from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly white woman seated across the aisle. Her husband leaned forward with concern etched on his weathered face. That was no accident, Mr. Patterson said quietly. We both saw it. And we heard what she said to you, Mrs. Patterson added, her voice barely audible over the cabin noise. My hearing aid picks up more than people think. Maya nodded gratefully. Thank you. What will you do? Mrs. Patterson asked. The question hung in the air as the plane began pushing back from the gate. The window of decision was closing rapidly. Maya thought about her mother, who had marched for civil rights in the 1960s. She thought about the young black woman in Air Force fatigues, who had nodded to her during boarding. What message would her silence send? She thought about every black service member who would board a plane in uniform after her, and what treatment her acquiescence might normalize for them. What would you do if you were in Maya's position? Would you stay silent to avoid further conflict? Or would you stand up against this injustice even if it meant risking your career moment? Comment number 1, if you believe she should fight back, or number 2, if you think she should prioritize making it to her ceremony. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're invested in Maya's story. With steady hands that belied her inner turmoil, Maya reached for her phone. The flight attendants were still completing final checks and hadn't yet announced that electronic devices should be switched off. Instead of calling customer service as Barbara might have expected, Maya dialed a number few civilians would recognize, the Pentagon's direct line for senior officers facing emergency situations. This is Captain Maya Johnson, ID 857294, she stated calmly when the line connected. I need to speak with General Williams immediately. Carson Miller, still recording discreetly, raised his eyebrows at the unexpected development. This wasn't a complaint to airline management. This was something else entirely. After a brief authentication process, Maya was connected to General Elijah Williams, her commanding officer and mentor of 7 years. Maya, aren't you en route to Washington? The general's deep voice carried authority even through the phone's small speaker. Yes, sir. I'm on Delta Flight 2437 from Atlanta. There's been an incident. Maya proceeded to detail the events concisely. Her military training, evident in the precision of her report. She described the coffee assault, the racist comment, and the captain's threat of removal. You're in uniform? General Williams asked, though he already knew the answer. Full dress uniform, sir, for tomorrow's ceremony. And you're certain the action was deliberate? Without question, sir. There was a brief silence on the line. Maya could almost see the general's expression, the same one he wore when receiving intelligence about an imminent threat. Calculating, resolute. Understood, Captain. Remain in position. I'll handle this directly. The line disconnected. Maya lowered the phone just as Barbara approached, a manufactured smile stretching her lips. All electronic devices need to be turned off now, she said with exaggerated pleasantness, clearly aware that other passengers were watching. Of course, Maya replied, powering down her phone without breaking eye contact. Barbara's smile faltered slightly at Maya's calm compliance. She had expected continued resistance, not this composed confidence. As the flight taxied toward the runway, murmurs spread through the first-class cabin. Several passengers were typing frantically on their phones before the final device shutdown announcement. Carson had already sent his video to cloud storage and texted links to several friends with the message, "Watch this, go viral. Happening on my flight right now." A businessman 2 rows ahead turned in his seat. "You're delaying everyone's travel. Plans with your complaint," he said loudly to Maya. "Some of us have important meetings to get to." "Mind your own business," Mr. Patterson shot back with surprising force for his age. You weren't so concerned about delays when they were serving your second bourbon. The businessman scoffed and turned around, but not before several other passengers murmured their agreement with Mr. Patterson. The cabin divided rapidly into factions: those who had witnessed Barbara's actions and supported Maya, those who reflexively sided with the airline staff, and the majority who remained uncomfortably silent, unwilling to involve themselves in the growing tension. Barbara moved through the cabin with increasing agitation, her earlier confidence giving way to nervous glances toward the front of the plane. Captain Whitman's voice came over the intercom, announcing a minor delay due to air traffic control as the aircraft stopped short of the runway. 20 minutes passed in tense silence. The plane remained stationary despite the captain's occasional updates about clearing up the traffic delay. Maya noticed Barbara checking her watch repeatedly, conferring in whispers with the other flight attendants. Another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay. We should be cleared for takeoff shortly. But Maya had been in enough tactical situations to recognize when something unexpected was developing. The captain's voice carried the strained quality of someone receiving unwelcome news. Barbara's increasing agitation confirmed it. 15 minutes later, the truth became apparent. The plane began moving again, not toward the runway, but back toward the terminal. "This is your captain speaking," Whitman announced, unable to fully mask his anger. "We've been instructed to return to the gate for a security inspection. This is just a formality, and we should be on our way again shortly." Barbara shot a venomous glance at Maya, who maintained her composure, though her heart raced with uncertainty. She hadn't expected General Williams to intervene so dramatically or so quickly. What exactly had he set in motion? As the plane docked at the gate, the cabin door opened. Instead of the expected gate agents, 3 military police officers in full uniform boarded the aircraft. Behind them stood 2 men in suits displaying Department of Defense credentials. The first-class cabin erupted in confused murmurs. Barbara's face drained of color. "What's happening? Do you think Maya's call reached higher authorities than anyone expected? How far do you think this incident will go? Leave your predictions in the comments below and hit that subscribe button to see how this unfolds." The military police officers moved with practiced efficiency through the first-class cabin. Their presence transformed the atmosphere instantly. Passengers who had been vocal in their complaints fell silent. Those who had been scrolling through phones now stared openly. Barbara Reynolds stood frozen near the galley, her complexion ashen. The lead officer, a staff sergeant with Rodriguez on his nameplate, approached Maya's seat directly. Several passengers gasped, assuming she was about to be removed from the flight. Instead, Rodriguez stood at attention and addressed her formally. "Captain Johnson, ma'am." "Sergeant," Maya acknowledged. "Military protocol automatic despite the extraordinary circumstances." "General Williams sends his regards, ma'am. Are you injured?" The question, asked with genuine concern rather than the dismissiveness she had received from the flight crew, nearly broke Maya's composure. "Minor burns, Sergeant. Nothing requiring immediate medical attention." Rodriguez nodded professionally while taking note of her coffee-soaked uniform. "Understood, ma'am." One of the DoD officials approached, introducing himself quietly as Special Agent Taylor. "Captain, we'll need a statement from you, but first we need to address the flight situation." The second military police officer approached Barbara, who had finally recovered enough to adopt an indignant expression. "What is the meaning of this? We have a plane full of passengers with schedules to keep." "Ma'am, I'm Corporal Wilson, United States Military Police. We need to speak with you and Captain Whitman immediately." "This is outrageous," Barbara sputtered. "You can't just board a commercial aircraft and—" "Actually, ma'am, we can," the second DoD official interjected smoothly. "Under federal aviation regulations and by direct authorization from the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. Now please accompany these officers to the jetway for questioning." Captain Whitman emerged from the cockpit, his face flushed with anger. "Who authorized this interruption to my flight?" Special Agent Taylor turned to him. "Captain Whitman, I presume. I'm afraid this comes from considerably above both our pay grades. The Secretary of Defense is personally interested in this matter." The color drained from Whitman's face. "The Secretary of Defense? That's impossible. This is just a customer service dispute. A United States Army officer in full-dress uniform, en route to receive a presidential commendation, was assaulted and subjected to racial discrimination on your aircraft, Taylor stated flatly. The Pentagon takes such matters extremely seriously. As this exchange occurred, Maya became aware of a commotion outside the aircraft. Through her window, she could see media vans pulling up near the terminal. Airport security personnel were establishing a perimeter. Her phone, which she had switched back on after the return to the gate, vibrated constantly with incoming messages. Carson leaned across the aisle. "Your video's gone viral," he whispered. 500,000 views already and climbing. Maya's stomach tightened. She had wanted accountability, not a media circus. But events had accelerated beyond her control. Meanwhile, Barbara was being escorted off the plane by Corporal Wilson, protesting loudly the entire way. "This is a misunderstanding. She's making this into something it isn't. I've never been racist in my life." Captain Whitman followed, his military bearing abandoned as he argued with Special Agent Taylor about jurisdiction and procedure. The remaining flight attendants huddled together, whispering urgently and casting fearful glances toward Maya. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez remained by Maya's side, effectively functioning as both protection and support. "General Williams is on a secure line with the airline's CEO right now," he informed her quietly. "The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office has also been notified." The implications of this statement stunned Maya. General Williams had not simply filed a complaint, he had activated the full machinery of military response. This wasn't just about her anymore. It had become a matter of how the armed forces protected their own against discrimination. Passengers throughout the cabin were now openly filming the proceedings, despite flight attendant Tara's half-hearted attempts to enforce the no-recording policy. Social media was already exploding with hashtags: Captain Johnson, Delta discrimination, respect our troops. In the cockpit, the first officer was receiving unprecedented instructions from air traffic control. Flight 2437 was grounded indefinitely pending investigation. No departure time could be provided. All passengers would need to deplane and be rerouted or accommodated. The announcement, when it finally came, triggered a wave of groans and complaints throughout the cabin. The businessman who had criticized Maya earlier was particularly vocal. "This is absolutely unacceptable. I'm missing $1 million meeting because of this nonsense." Mrs. Patterson turned in her seat to face him. "Young man, that officer has earned more respect in one day of her service than you'll command in your entire career. Show some decency." Her rebuke silenced him, and several nearby passengers nodded in agreement. The tide of public opinion within the cabin was shifting rapidly as the details of the incident spread from person to person. Outside the aircraft, the situation was escalating further. Delta's regional director had arrived at the gate, along with a hastily assembled crisis management team. They were greeted by not only DoD officials, but also representatives from the Department of Transportation's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, who had been alerted by the Pentagon. Maya's phone rang. General Williams himself. "Captain Johnson," she answered formally. "At ease, Maya," came the general's reassuring voice. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir. Just overwhelmed by the response." "The response is proportional to the offense," Williams stated firmly. "An attack on one soldier is an attack on the entire military, especially when that soldier is en route to receive the Distinguished Service Cross from the Commander-in-Chief." "Sir, I appreciate the support, but I never intended for this to become a federal case." "It became a federal case the moment that flight attendant decided your race disqualified you from the respect your uniform commands," Williams replied. "The Secretary of Defense agrees. Now there's a medical team waiting to examine your burns, and we've arranged alternative transportation to Washington. You will not miss your ceremony, Captain." As Maya processed this information, Special Agent Taylor returned to the cabin and approached her seat. "Captain Johnson, we need to deplane you first. There's substantial media presence in the terminal. We can provide an escort if you prefer to avoid the cameras." Maya considered her options. Her uniform was stained and disheveled, hardly the Kai-Si image of military precision she normally presented, but hiding from the cameras would send the wrong message. "No escort needed," she decided. "I'll walk out as I am." Rodriguez nodded with unmistakable approval. "Very good, ma'am." As Maya stood to gather her belongings, an unexpected sound filled the cabin. Applause. It started with the Pattersons and Carson, then spread to most of the first-class section and beyond into the main cabin. Passengers who had witnessed the incident directly, along with those who had pieced it together through whispers and social media, unified in this spontaneous show of support. Maya acknowledged them with a dignified nod, her military bearing holding despite her disheveled appearance. As she moved toward the exit, a young girl stopped her. "Are you a hero?" the child asked innocently. Maya knelt to the girl's level, despite the pain from her burns. "I just serve my country," she replied softly. "Just like many others." "You look like a hero to me," the girl insisted. That simple statement, delivered with childlike certainty, affected Maya more deeply than all the formal recognition awaiting her in Washington. It reminded her why this stand mattered, not just for herself, but for this child and countless others who needed to see that justice was possible, that dignity was indeed a birthright worth defending. As Maya stepped into the jetway, she was met by a wall of camera flashes and shouted questions from reporters who had somehow gained access. The story was already breaking nationally. Her phone continued to vibrate with messages. Her mother, fellow officers, even old classmates who had seen the video. Behind her, Delta Flight 2437 remained grounded. Before her lay an unexpected battlefield, in the ongoing struggle for equality, one where her training, courage, and principles would be tested in ways no military academy could have prepared her for. The terminal erupted into chaos as Maya emerged from the jetway. Camera flashes created a strobe light effect, while reporters shouted questions from behind a hastily established security perimeter. Airport staff struggled to maintain order as travelers stopped to witness the unfolding drama, many recording with their phones after recognizing Maya from the viral video. "Captain Johnson, how do you respond to Delta's initial statement claiming this was a simple misunderstanding? Is it true the Secretary of Defense personally intervened? What do you say to those suggesting you overreacted to poor customer service?" Maya maintained her military bearing, neither engaging with the questions nor appearing intimidated by the sudden spotlight. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and his team formed a protective formation around her, guiding her toward a private airport lounge where a medical team waited. Meanwhile, on the grounded aircraft, the situation had transformed dramatically. The announcement that all passengers would need to deplane and be rerouted triggered a wave of frustration that initially focused on Maya, until Carson Miller stood up. "Before anyone blames Captain Johnson for your travel disruption," he announced, loudly, holding up his phone, "you should see what actually happened." He played his video at maximum volume, the sound carrying clearly through the hushed cabin. Barbara's whispered, "Your kind belongs in coach," was faintly audible, but unmistakable. The cabin erupted. Passengers who had been annoyed about their delayed travels now directed their anger toward the airline. A business traveler in an expensive suit who had previously complained about the delay approached the remaining flight attendants. "I fly over 100,000 miles annually with Delta, and I am appalled," he declared loudly. "Consider my company's corporate account under review." Outside the aircraft, Barbara Reynolds sat rigid in a private room, facing questioning from both airline, security, and federal officials. Her earlier indignation had collapsed under the weight of mounting evidence. The plane's security cameras had captured the coffee incident from multiple angles, clearly showing the deliberate nature of the spill. Carson's video provided audio confirmation of her racist remark. Worst of all for Barbara, airline officials had pulled her personnel file and discovered something damning: 7 previous complaints about discriminatory behavior toward minority passengers, all quietly buried by management. "Ms. Reynolds," the airline's hastily summoned legal representative began, "your employment contract includes a non-discrimination clause that you appear to have violated repeatedly." "Those were all misunderstandings," Barbara insisted, her voice wavering. "Passengers exaggerate when they don't get their way." 7 separate incidents is a pattern, not a misunderstanding, the lawyer countered. "And now we have video evidence." Barbara's face crumpled as the reality of her situation dawned. "Am I being terminated?" "That's the least of your concerns right now," interjected Special Agent Taylor. The Department of Justice is considering whether this incident constitutes a civil rights violation under federal law. In the airport's executive lounge, Maya sat stoically as a military physician examined the burns on her chest and thighs. Though painful, they were fortunately first-degree burns that would heal without scarring. More concerning to the medical team was Maya's elevated blood pressure and stress levels. "Captain, I strongly recommend postponing your ceremony until you've had proper rest," the physician advised. Maya shook her head firmly. "Not an option, doctor. Too many people have sacrificed too much to get me to this point." Her phone rang again. Her mother. Maya had been dreading this call, knowing Sandra Johnson would be both fiercely proud of her daughter's stand and deeply worried about the repercussions. "Baby, are you all right?" Sandra's voice carried the particular mixture of strength and concern that had guided Maya throughout her life. "I'm fine, Mom. Just some minor burns and a ruined uniform." "I'm not asking about your physical condition, Maya Elizabeth Johnson," her mother replied, using the full name technique that still commanded Maya's attention even in adulthood. "I'm asking if you're prepared for what comes next. You've just become the center of a national conversation about race and respect." Before Maya could respond, her secure line beeped with another incoming call. The White House military office. "Mom, I need to take this. I'll call you back." Across town, at Delta's Atlanta headquarters, CEO Richard Hayes was experiencing the worst day of his corporate career. What had started as a customer service incident was ballooning into a full-blown crisis. The company's stock had dropped 7% in 2 hours as boycott Delta trended nationwide. The Secretary of Defense had personally called to express his profound disappointment in the airline's treatment of a decorated officer. Thousands of military veterans were posting videos of themselves cutting up Delta frequent flyer cards. Hayes had immediately boarded a corporate jet to Atlanta from New York, determined to contain the damage. His PR team had drafted a standard, corporate apology, but Hayes recognized that this situation demanded more. The racial element made this potentially explosive, and the military connection added another dimension entirely. "Get me on that base," he instructed his team as their car approached the airport. "I need to speak with Captain Johnson personally." Back in the executive lounge, Maya was speaking with the White House military office, which was rearranging her transportation to Washington via military aircraft. The presidential ceremony would proceed as scheduled, with additional security measures in place due to the media attention. Carson Miller had been escorted to the lounge as a key witness. His video had now reached 5 million views and was being featured on national news networks. "I never expected this to blow up so dramatically," he told Maya. "I just knew I needed to document what was happening." "Thank you for doing that," Maya replied sincerely. "Without your video, this would have been my word against hers." "Doesn't explain the military response, though," Carson observed. "That's what turned this from a viral moment to national news." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "The military takes care of its own. When they received word that an officer in uniform was being mistreated while traveling to receive a presidential commendation." She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear. This wasn't just about one black woman facing discrimination. It was about respect for the uniform, the chain of command, and the military's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination within its ranks, a policy they apparently expected civilian entities to honor as well. The lounge door opened, and Special Agent Taylor entered with news. "Captain, we've been informed that Delta's CEO is requesting a meeting with you. He's just landed at the executive terminal." Maya raised an eyebrow. That was fast. "Social media moves quicker than military bureaucracy," Taylor replied with a rare smile. "Their stock is in freefall." Maya considered her options. She had no obligation to meet with Hayes, and part of her wanted to refuse on principle. But her military training emphasized resolution over retaliation. "I'll meet with him," she decided. "But I want my JAG representative present." Within 30 minutes, Richard Hayes entered the lounge looking considerably less polished than his corporate headshots. His tie was askew, his normally perfect hair disheveled from the wind on the bar. "Tarmac." "Captain Johnson," he began, extending his hand. I want to personally apologize for the inexcusable treatment you received on our aircraft today. Maya accepted his handshake with military formality. Mr. Hayes, the actions of our employee do not reflect Delta's values, Hayes continued, falling into practiced corporate speech. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. 7 previous complaints against Ms. Reynolds suggest otherwise. Maya's JAG representative interjected coolly. Hayes blanched. I was not aware of those specific cases. Rest assured we're conducting a thorough investigation. It's already been conducted, Maya stated. Your flight attendant assaulted me and made a racist remark. Your captain threatened to remove me for reporting it. Both actions occurred while I was in uniform, traveling to receive a presidential commendation. The only question remaining is how your company plans to address this systematic failure. Hayes recognized the precariousness of his position. This wasn't a situation where standard corporate damage control would suffice. The combined pressure of viral social media outrage, military involvement, and potential federal civil rights charges created a perfect storm that threatened not just Delta's reputation, but its regulatory standing. Ms. Reynolds has been terminated, effective immediately, Hayes announced. Captain Whitman has been suspended pending review, but I recognize that individual actions reflect broader cultural issues. I'm prepared to discuss substantial changes to our training programs, complaint procedures, and accountability measures. As Hayes spoke, Maya's phone lit up with notifications. The video had now been viewed over 10 million times. Military service organizations were issuing statements of support. The story had evolved from a viral moment to a national conversation about respect, race, and the treatment of military personnel. Outside the airport, protesters had begun to gather with signs reading, "Respect our troops," and "Black in uniform, still black." Veterans groups had organized an impromptu rally in support of Maya. What had begun as a personal humiliation was transforming into a movement. In Washington, congressional representatives from both parties were issuing statements condemning the discrimination and calling for hearings on consumer protection in air travel. The Secretary of Transportation had announced a department-wide review of airline practices regarding discrimination complaints. As the implications of these developments settled over the room, Maya felt a strange mixture of vindication and apprehension. She had stood up for her dignity in a moment of injustice, never anticipating the avalanche that would follow. Now she found herself at the center of a national examination of how America treated its black service members, and by extension, all people of color who served their country while still facing discrimination. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, "this isn't about me receiving special treatment because of my uniform or my rank. It's about ensuring that no passenger, military or civilian of any race, experiences what I experienced today." Hayes nodded, soberly, recognizing that this moment called for genuine reform rather than public relations management. "Captain Johnson, I'd like to invite you to help us address these issues systemically. Your perspective would be invaluable in reforming our practices." Before Maya could respond, her secure line rang again. General Williams, with an update she never expected. The president himself had been briefed on the situation and wanted to speak with her directly before tomorrow's ceremony. The tables had turned completely. What began with a flight attendant believing she could humiliate a black officer with impunity had escalated to presidential attention. For Maya, the challenge now was navigating this unexpected spotlight while staying true to her mission and values. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "we'll continue this conversation after my ceremony in Washington. I expect concrete proposals, not just apologies." As Hayes nodded and departed, Maya turned to prepare for her call with the president. The coffee stains on her uniform had dried, but the impact of what had transpired aboard Delta Flight 2437 was still unfolding across the nation. As Maya prepared for her military transport to Washington, a different kind of storm was brewing in the digital realm. Investigative journalist Alexis Rivera, known for her thorough exposés on corporate malfeasance, had received an anonymous tip about Barbara Reynolds' social media history. What she discovered painted a disturbing picture that extended far beyond a single incident of discrimination. "I've found Barbara Reynolds' private Facebook account," Alexis told her editor at The Atlantic. "It's filled with posts disparaging Minorities, especially those in positions of authority. There's specific content about unqualified minorities in first class. The editor whistled. How verified is this? Multiple photographs confirm it's her. Account goes back 8 years, and there's more. She belongs to several private groups with explicitly racist content. While Alexis developed her story, another journalist at the Washington Post was following a different angle, interviewing former passengers who had encountered Barbara on previous flights. The reporter had posted a simple query on Twitter. Have you experienced or witnessed discriminatory behavior from Delta flight attendant Barbara Reynolds? DM me your story. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, 27 people had come forward with accounts of Barbara's pattern of treating passengers of color differently than white travelers. Particularly damning were the stories from other black military personnel who described similar experiences but hadn't documented them as thoroughly as Maya's incident had been. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but weren't sure how to respond? Comment number 1 if you believe bystanders should always intervene directly, or number 2 if you think recording evidence like Carson did is more effective. What responsibility do we have to each other in these situations? Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their race or background. Meanwhile, Delta's internal investigation had uncovered a troubling paper trail. The 7 previous complaints against Barbara had all been processed by the same middle manager, Thomas Griffith, who had consistently downgraded their severity and buried them in bureaucratic procedure. Further examination revealed that Griffith had similarly handled dozens of discrimination complaints against other employees, effectively creating a system where racist behavior went unpunished. As these investigations proceeded, Maya was airborne on a C-37A military transport jet, accompanied by Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and a military public affairs officer. The Pentagon had mobilized to ensure she reached Washington without further incident and was prepared for the media attention that would inevitably follow her at the ceremony. Captain Johnson, the public affairs officer, began. You've become the center of a significant news story that intersects military service, racial justice, and corporate accountability. The Secretary of Defense believes this presents an opportunity to highlight the military's commitment to equality within its ranks. Maya's expression remained carefully neutral. I didn't take this stand to become a spokesperson, Lieutenant. I simply refuse to accept disrespect to the uniform. Understood, ma'am. But sometimes circumstances choose us rather than the other way around. The President will likely address this incident during tomorrow's ceremony. Maya nodded slowly, realizing that her personal stand for dignity had evolved into something much larger. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. The Atlantic had just published Alexis Rivera's investigation into Barbara Reynolds' history of racist behavior, complete with screenshots from private social media groups where Barbara had shared memes mocking minority passengers. The article included a damning quote from a former Delta employee. Barbara wasn't just individually racist. She operated within a system that protected her behavior. Complaints were filed and ignored. Management knew and did nothing. This wasn't one bad apple. The whole orchard needs inspection. Simultaneously, national attention was turning to Maya herself. Her military record was being highlighted across news outlets. Her 2 Purple Hearts, her leadership during the evacuation mission that had earned her the Presidential Commendation, her academic achievements at West Point, all were being presented to the public, creating a stark contrast between her service to country and the disrespect she had encountered. Sandra Johnson, Maya's mother, was being inundated with interview requests. After careful consideration and a conversation with her daughter, she agreed to speak exclusively with CNN. My daughter has faced discrimination her entire life, Sandra told the interviewer, her dignified presence commanding respect. As a black girl in South Carolina, as a cadet at West Point, as an officer in combat zones, each time I taught her the same lesson. Your dignity is non-negotiable. Did you expect her to stand up the way she did on that flight? The interviewer asked. Sandra smiled with unmistakable pride. I expected nothing less. Maya understands that when you wear that uniform, you're not just representing yourself, you're representing every black soldier who came before you and everyone who will come after. Accepting disrespect, dishonors them all. The interview resonated deeply with viewers. Dignity is non-negotiable began trending alongside Justice for Captain Johnson. Back at Delta headquarters, CEO Richard Hayes was meeting with his executive team in crisis mode. The company's stock had dropped 12%, and major corporate clients were threatening to cancel their business travel contracts unless significant changes were implemented. This goes beyond a single incident, Hayes acknowledged, his earlier corporate polish replaced by genuine concern. We're facing a systemic failure in how we handle discrimination complaints. His chief diversity officer, who had been marginalized for years, spoke up with newfound authority. I've been flagging these issues for 3 years. Perhaps now you'll take my recommendations seriously. Hayes nodded soberly. Consider your budget tripled. I want a complete overhaul of our training, reporting, and accountability systems. The impact extended beyond Delta. Other airlines were conducting emergency reviews of their own discrimination complaint procedures, recognizing that they could easily face similar scrutiny. The Department of Transportation announced it would require all airlines to submit comprehensive reports on discrimination complaints and their resolutions over the past 5 years. As these developments unfolded, a more personal story emerged through social media. Other flight attendants began sharing their experiences with Barbara Reynolds, revealing that her behavior had created a toxic work environment, not just for passengers, but for colleagues as well. Barbara made working Delta flights unbearable for attendants of color, wrote one former colleague on LinkedIn. She would assign us the most difficult sections, criticize our appearance, and undermine us with passengers. Management knew. They always knew. These testimonials painted a picture of institutional failure that extended far beyond a single coffee spill. They suggested that Barbara had been empowered by a corporate culture that valued conflict avoidance over confronting discrimination, a culture that numerous employees had tried to change through proper channels without success. In Washington, preparations for the next day's ceremony continued, but with significant modifications. What had been planned as a routine military commendation was evolving into a statement on equality and respect. The White House communications team worked through the night to revise the president's remarks to address the incident while honoring Maya's preference not to overshadow the achievements of other service members being recognized. Throughout all this, Maya maintained remarkable composure. In her hotel room, she prepared a fresh uniform provided by the Pentagon, reviewed her acceptance speech, and spoke briefly with her mother. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Sandra asked. "For the ceremony, yes," Maya replied. "For everything else?" She paused, allowing a rare moment of vulnerability. "I never intended to become the face of this issue, Mom. Few who change history ever intend to," Sandra observed wisely. "They simply refuse to accept injustice when confronted with it." As Maya prepared for sleep, her phone displayed one final news alert for the day. Thomas Griffith, the Delta manager, who had buried discrimination complaints, had been terminated along with 3 other executives. The corporate accountability was expanding beyond Barbara Reynolds to include those who had enabled her behavior through inaction. Maya set her phone aside and closed her eyes, knowing that whatever ceremony awaited her tomorrow would be fundamentally different from what she had anticipated when boarding Flight 2437. She had stood up for her dignity as an individual, but had inadvertently sparked a much broader examination of how America treated its black service members, and by extension, all who faced discrimination while serving their country. The coffee stains had been washed from her uniform, but their impact had permanently marked the national conversation about race, respect, and accountability. 2 weeks after the incident, the marble corridors of the Dirksen Senate office building hummed with anticipation. The Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation had convened an emergency hearing titled "Discrimination in Air Travel, Systemic Failures and Necessary Reforms." News cameras lined the back wall of the hearing room, broadcasting live to a nation that had become increasingly invested in Captain Maya Johnson's story. Maya sat at the witness table in her dress uniform, which bore a new addition: the Distinguished Service Cross she had received from the president. The ceremony had proceeded as scheduled, though with significantly more media attention than originally planned. The president had addressed the Delta incident directly, stating that, The disrespect shown to Captain Johnson stands in stark contrast to the respect she has earned through her extraordinary service to this nation. Now, Maya faced a different kind of service, testifying before Congress about an experience that had transformed from a personal humiliation into a national conversation about race, respect, and accountability in American institutions. Chairman Senator Robert Menendez gavelled the hearing to order. This committee convenes today to examine troubling patterns of discrimination in commercial air travel, brought to light by the reprehensible treatment of Captain Maya Johnson, decorated Army officer who has served this nation with distinction. Maya surveyed the packed room. Barbara Reynolds sat several seats away, flanked by her newly hired attorney. Barbara's expression vacillated between defiance and fear as cameras periodically focused on her. Also present were Richard Hayes, Delta's CEO, Thomas Griffith, the recently terminated manager who had buried discrimination complaints, Carson Miller, whose video had catalyzed national attention, and several other witnesses representing airline, industry groups, and civil rights organizations. Captain Johnson, Chairman Menendez began, would you please describe for this committee what occurred aboard Delta Flight 2437 on that day? Maya's testimony was precise and measured, reflecting her military training. She neither embellished nor minimized the incident, simply stating facts in chronological order. The coffee spill, the whispered racist remark, the captain's threat of removal. Her call to General Williams, the subsequent military response. Throughout her testimony, Maya wore the stained uniform she had been wearing during the incident, a powerful visual that silenced the room. The dark coffee marks across her chest, partially obscuring her medals, provided stark evidence that no verbal testimony could match. This uniform, Maya explained, represents not just my service but the service of every black soldier who has worn it while facing similar discrimination. I chose to wear it today as a reminder that what happened to me was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that many have experienced. When questioned about her decision to call the Pentagon rather than file a conventional customer complaint, Maya was equally forthright. Senator, throughout my military career I've learned that effective systems exist to address discrimination within the armed forces. When I encountered discrimination as a soldier in uniform, I utilized the system I trusted to respond appropriately. Carson Miller's testimony followed, accompanied by his now famous video playing on large screens throughout the hearing room. The moment when Barbara whispered, "Your kind belongs in coach," was amplified for all to hear, leaving no doubt about the racial nature of the comment. I recorded this because I believed what I was witnessing was wrong, Carson stated simply. I didn't know Captain Johnson. I didn't know her rank or her accomplishments. I just knew that a human being was being treated with contempt based on the color of her skin, and I couldn't remain silent. When Barbara Reynolds was called to testify, the contrast with Maya's composure could not have been more stark. Barbara appeared defensive and agitated, frequently contradicting herself under questioning. Ms. Reynolds, Senator Tammy Duckworth, herself a decorated combat veteran, began, "Do you deny making the statement captured in Mr. Miller's video?" I don't recall exactly what I said in the heat of the moment, Barbara hedged. The video clearly captures you saying, "Your kind belongs in coach." What did you mean by "your kind"? Barbara shifted uncomfortably. I meant military personnel should be in coach, not first class. A murmur ran through the room at this obvious falsehood. Senator Duckworth, who had lost both legs serving in Iraq, fixed Barbara with a steady gaze. Ms. Reynolds, I am also military personnel. Would you consider me my kind as well? Barbara's facade cracked. This is unfair. One mistake in 23 years of service and my life is ruined. According to Delta's internal investigation, Senator Duckworth continued, there were 7 previous complaints of discriminatory behavior filed against you. Do you consider those mistakes as well? Barbara's attorney intervened, requesting a brief recess, which the chairman granted. When the hearing resumed, Barbara appeared more composed but no less defensive. I acknowledge that I made an inappropriate comment, she conceded, reading from prepared notes. I was under significant stress that day, but I categorically deny that I am racist or that my actions reflect a pattern of discrimination. This carefully worded non-apology prompted Senator Cory Booker to intervene. Ms. Reynolds, The Atlantic published extensive documentation of your participation in social media groups that shared racist content. Do you deny that participation? Barbara's prepared statement had not anticipated this question. Those were private groups, she protested. My personal views have nothing to do with my professional conduct. Your personal views included posting memes mocking black passengers in first class, Senator Booker pressed. How can you claim those views didn't influence your professional conduct toward Captain Johnson? As Barbara struggled to respond, Thomas Griffith's testimony provided perhaps the most damning indictment of the systemic nature of the problem. Under intense questioning, Griffith admitted to burying dozens of discrimination complaints not just against Barbara, but against multiple employees. It was considered more efficient to manage these complaints internally rather than escalate them, he stated mechanically. More efficient for whom? Senator Maria Cantwell demanded. Certainly not for the passengers experiencing discrimination. Griffith hesitated before answering. For the company, discrimination investigations hurt morale and create liability. So Delta's official policy was to protect employees who discriminated rather than passengers who experienced that discrimination. It wasn't official policy, Griffith hedged. It was understood practice. CEO Richard Hayes, testifying last, appeared genuinely chastened by the proceedings. Gone was the corporate polish of his earlier statements, replaced by what seemed like authentic contrition. What happened to Captain Johnson reflects failures at every level of our organization, Hayes acknowledged. From individual bias to management indifference to corporate policies that prioritized conflict avoidance over justice. We are committed to fundamental reform. Hayes then outlined Delta's newly announced Comprehensive Accountability Initiative, mandatory bias training for all staff, an independent review board for discrimination complaints, transparent reporting of complaint resolutions, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior with clear consequences. As the hearing concluded, Chairman Menendez asked Maya for final thoughts. Captain Johnson, beyond the specific reforms discussed today, what message do you hope the American people take from your experience? Maya considered the question carefully before responding. Senator, I believe most Americans want to live in a country where a person is judged by their character and contributions, not by their race. What happened on that flight reveals how far we still are from that ideal. But the response, from Mr. Miller's decision to record, to the military's swift intervention, to this very hearing, gives me hope that we are moving toward a time when dignity truly becomes non-negotiable for all Americans. The hearing room erupted in applause, a rare occurrence in congressional proceedings. As Maya gathered her materials to leave, she noticed Barbara watching her from across the room. Their eyes met briefly, and Maya saw something unexpected in Barbara's expression. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps the beginning of recognition. An uncomfortable confrontation with the consequences of one's actions and the belief system that enabled them. Outside the hearing room, reporters clamored for statements. The story continued to evolve from an individual incident into a national examination of accountability, respect, and the systems that either enable or prevent discrimination in American institutions. For Maya, the most powerful moment came when a young black girl approached her with a handmade card. "Thank you for standing up," the child said simply. "I want to be brave like you when I grow up." In that moment, Maya understood that her stand for personal dignity had transcended the individual, becoming something far more significant than she had ever intended. The months following the congressional hearing witnessed unprecedented transformation across the airline industry. What began as one black soldier's stand for dignity had catalyzed a comprehensive examination of how commercial aviation addressed, or failed to address, discrimination throughout its systems. Delta Airlines, under CEO Richard Hayes' chastened leadership, implemented its Comprehensive Accountability Initiative with remarkable speed. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, underwent enhanced bias training developed in partnership with civil rights organizations. An independent review board was established to evaluate discrimination complaints, with members drawn from outside the company to ensure impartiality. Most significantly, Delta began publishing quarterly transparency reports detailing the number and nature of discrimination complaints received, along with their resolutions. The Johnson standards, as they came to be known throughout the industry, quickly spread beyond Delta. Within 6 months, every major U.S. carrier had adopted similar accountability measures, partly from genuine commitment to improvement and partly from fear of being the next company caught in the spotlight of public scrutiny. The Department of Transportation, empowered by bipartisan congressional support following the hearing, established new regulations requiring airlines to maintain standardized reporting of discrimination incidents. Airlines that failed to adequately address verified complaints faced significant fines and potential restrictions on route expansions. Barbara Reynolds, meanwhile, experienced the full consequences of her actions. Terminated from Delta and unable to secure employment with other airlines due to the publicity surrounding the incident, she initially retreated from public view. Her lawyer issued occasional statements maintaining that Barbara had been scapegoated for systemic issues beyond her control. But these assertions gained little traction in the face of overwhelming evidence of her personal conduct. 3 months after the hearing, Barbara made an unexpected appearance on a cable news program, ostensibly to share her side of the story. The interview quickly deteriorated when Barbara refused to acknowledge the racial motivations behind her treatment of Maya. "I made a mistake in how I spoke to her," Barbara conceded. "But this isn't about race. It's about a customer service incident that's been blown out of proportion." The interviewer, well prepared with evidence from the Atlantic's investigation, pressed her on her social media history and pattern of complaints. "If this wasn't about race," the interviewer asked, "why did you specifically target passengers of color for different treatment? Why did you participate in online groups that shared racist content?" Barbara's response, claiming her online activity was just jokes and that complaints against her were misunderstandings, further damaged her already tarnished reputation. By refusing to acknowledge the racial bias underlying her actions, she inadvertently provided the public with a case study in how prejudice often operates, through denial, deflection, and refusal to examine one's own behavior honestly. Thomas Griffith, the manager who had systematically buried discrimination complaints, faced similar professional consequences, but took a different path. After months of reflection, he published a candid essay in the New York Times titled, "How I Enabled Discrimination and What I Learned." "I told myself I was protecting the company," Griffith wrote, "but in reality, I was preserving a system that valued some customers' dignity less than others. My complicity wasn't just in ignoring complaints, but in creating an environment where employees like Barbara Reynolds believed their behavior was acceptable." Griffith's essay sparked discussion across corporate America about the responsibility of middle management in either enabling or preventing discriminatory practices. His honest self-examination, contrasted with Barbara's continued denial, illustrated 2 possible responses to being confronted with one's participation in systemic discrimination. Throughout these developments, Maya Johnson navigated her unexpected role as a catalyst for change with characteristic dignity. The Pentagon, recognizing both her leadership qualities and the symbolic importance of her story, created a new position for her, Special Advisor on Inclusion and Equality to the Secretary of Defense. In this role, Maya developed training programs that helped military personnel identify and address discrimination not just within the armed forces, but in their interactions with civilian institutions. Her approach emphasized practical strategies rather than abstract concepts, drawing from her own experiences to illustrate how discrimination operates and how it can be effectively confronted. "Dignity is non-negotiable" became Maya's signature phrase, echoing her mother's wisdom. But securing that dignity often requires both individual courage and institutional support. Maya's relationship with her mother deepened through this shared experience. Sandra Johnson, who had spent decades teaching mathematics in underfunded schools, found her own wisdom validated in her daughter's stand and its widespread impact. "You've always been good at calculating trajectories as an artillery officer," Sandra told Maya during a quiet dinner at home. "But this time, you calculated the trajectory of justice, and it's hitting targets you never even aimed for." The elderly couple from the flight, Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, transformed their spontaneous support for Maya into organized action. They founded the Airline Passengers Advocacy Group, which quickly grew to over 100,000 members. The organization developed a mobile app that allowed travelers to report discrimination incidents in real time, creating accountability through transparency. Carson Miller, whose video had been the catalyst for national attention, received the Witness Courage Award from the National Civil Rights Museum. In his acceptance speech, he addressed the importance of active allyship. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," Carson insisted. "I just refused to be a passive bystander to injustice. That's not heroism, it's the minimum requirement of citizenship in a democratic society." 6 months after the incident, Maya received an unexpected letter. It came through official channels, having been vetted by military security, but originated from an unlikely source: Barbara Reynolds. The letter was not the full acknowledgement of racism that many might have expected, but it represented a small step in Barbara's personal journey. "Captain Johnson," it began, "I have spent months angry about the consequences I've faced, believing myself to be unfairly treated. Recently, I began working with a therapist who has helped me see that my focus on my own losses has prevented me from truly understanding the harm I caused you. While I am still working to understand all the factors that influenced my behavior that day, I want to acknowledge that my actions were wrong and that you deserved better treatment. This is not a request for forgiveness, just an acknowledgement of truth." Maya responded with characteristic grace, neither dismissing Barbara's limited acknowledgement nor pretending it erased the harm caused. "Ms. Reynolds, I appreciate your letter. Understanding our actions and their impacts is difficult work. I hope your journey continues not just for your benefit, but for all those you will encounter in the future." This exchange, while private, represented the personal dimension of the broader systemic changes unfolding across the airline industry and beyond. Real transformation required both institutional reform and individual growth, policy changes alongside personal reckonings. As the one-year anniversary of the incident approached, the Johnson standards had expanded beyond airlines to influence customer service policies in hotels, restaurants, and retail establishments. The simple principles of accountability, transparency, and zero tolerance for discrimination provided a framework that organizations could adapt to their specific contexts. For Maya, the most meaningful indicator of impact came not from corporate policy changes or congressional hearings, but from the letters she received from other service members of color. They shared their own experiences of discrimination and described how her example had empowered them to stand up for their dignity. "Before I saw what happened to you," wrote one young Army lieutenant, "I accepted disrespect as the cost of wearing this uniform while black. You showed me that dignity and service are not contradictory but complementary. My uniform deserves respect, and so does the person wearing it." These messages confirmed what Maya had come to understand throughout this unexpected journey. Her stand on Delta Flight 2437 had never been just about one coffee spill or one racist remark. It had been about affirming a fundamental principle that extended far beyond her individual experience. That dignity, indeed, was non-negotiable, not just for decorated officers, but for every person. 1 year to the day after the incident on Delta Flight 2437, Maya Johnson stood in the East Room of the White House for the second time. The gold braid on her dress uniform caught the light as she waited for the ceremony to begin. Unlike her first visit to receive the Distinguished Service Cross, today's event had been planned with her story at its center. President Adams had invited Maya to witness the signing of the Commercial Transportation Equality Act, legislation that codified many of the Johnson standards into federal law. The bill, which had passed with rare bipartisan support, established uniform requirements for how transportation providers address discrimination complaints, mandated transparency in reporting, and created significant penalties for non-compliance. The East Room buzzed with an unusual mix of attendees. Congressional leaders who had championed the legislation stood alongside civil rights activists who had been fighting for such reforms for decades. Military officers in dress uniforms mingled with airline executives who had implemented voluntary reforms ahead of the legislation. Sandra Johnson sat in the front row, elegant in a royal blue suit, pride evident in her posture. Carson Miller was there with his wife, still somewhat amazed that his spontaneous decision to record an injustice had contributed to federal legislation. The Pattersons, whose airline passengers advocacy group now boasted over 250,000 members, chatted animatedly with Transportation Secretary Rodriguez about future initiatives. Even Delta CEO Richard Hayes was present, having earned qualified respect for his company's comprehensive response once the initial crisis had passed. The reforms implemented under his leadership had become a case study in corporate accountability, taught at business schools nationwide. Conspicuously absent was Barbara Reynolds. Despite multiple attempts by journalists to secure an interview about the legislation's impact, she had maintained her privacy in recent months. Reports suggested she had moved to Arizona and was working in a non-customer-facing role at a small company, gradually rebuilding her life away from the spotlight. As the Marine Band played "Hail to the Chief," President Adams entered the East Room. Following the formal introduction, he approached the podium and began his remarks. 1 year ago, Captain Maya Johnson boarded a flight in Atlanta, bound for Washington to receive our nation's second highest military honor. She expected nothing more than the basic dignity any American deserves, and certainly nothing less than the respect her uniform commands. The president paused, his gaze finding Maya in the front row. What happened next revealed both the persistent reality of discrimination in our society and the possibility of meaningful change when we confront that reality honestly. Captain Johnson's courageous stand that day has transformed how we understand accountability in public accommodations. Adams continued, detailing the legislation's provisions and acknowledging the collaborative effort that had brought it to fruition. He emphasized that the law represented not just regulatory requirements, but a reaffirmation of core American values: the right to be treated with dignity regardless of race, religion, gender, or background isn't a partisan issue. It's a human issue. It transcends political divisions because it speaks to who we aspire to be as a nation. After the formal signing, the president invited Maya to the podium. This had not been part of the planned program, and Maya felt a momentary flutter of nervousness, a rare sensation for someone who had remained composed under enemy fire. Taking a deep breath, she approached the microphone. The East Room fell, silent in anticipation. "Mr. President, distinguished guests, fellow Americans," Maya began, her voice steady and clear. "I stand before you not as an activist or a policy expert, but as a soldier who believes in the ideals this country represents, even when we fall short of achieving them." Maya paused, surveying the diverse faces before her. 1 year ago, I experienced what countless Americans of color experience daily: the painful reminder that some see our dignity as optional rather than fundamental. What made my experience unusual wasn't that it happened, but that it was recorded, amplified, and ultimately addressed through concrete action. She acknowledged the various groups who had transformed an individual incident into systemic change. Carson for documenting the truth, the military for responding decisively, journalists for investigating deeper patterns, lawmakers for creating accountability, and ordinary citizens for refusing to accept discrimination as inevitable. I wear this uniform because I believe America's founding promise that all people are created equal is worth defending, even when our nation struggles to fulfill that promise. The legislation signed today represents progress not because it solves the problem of discrimination, but because it acknowledges that problem requires deliberate, structured, and transparent solutions. Maya's gaze found her mother in the front, drawing strength from Sandra's steady presence. "My mother taught me that dignity is non-negotiable. Today we have taken a step toward making that principle real in the everyday experiences of all Americans. But laws alone cannot transform hearts and minds. That work belongs to each of us, in our daily choices to recognize and respect each other's humanity." As Maya concluded her remarks, the East Room erupted in sustained applause. President Adams embraced her before presenting her with the ceremonial pen used to sign the legislation. Following the ceremony, Maya found herself surrounded by well-wishers, but her attention was drawn to a familiar face, approaching hesitantly from the periphery. Captain Richard Whitman, the pilot who had threatened to remove her from Flight 2437 a year earlier. Whitman had been suspended after the incident, then reinstated following completion of Delta's enhanced training program. Unlike Barbara, he had publicly acknowledged his failure to properly investigate the situation and had become an advocate for reform within the airline. "Captain Johnson," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology that's been a year in coming. I failed to show you the respect you deserved, both as a passenger and as a fellow officer." Maya accepted his handshake. "We all have our moments of testing, Captain Whitman. What matters is how we respond to them." "I've been speaking to pilot groups about what I learned," Whitman explained, "about how authority without accountability becomes something dangerous." Their conversation was interrupted by Sandra Johnson, who had navigated through the crowd to reach her daughter. "Mom," Maya said, embracing her. "Everything I said up there came from you." "No, baby," Sandra replied, her eyes bright with emotion. "You took what I taught you and amplified it beyond anything I could have imagined. That's what each generation is supposed to do, take the wisdom they're given and expand it." As the reception continued, Maya received a discreet message from General Williams. The Secretary of Defense wanted a word in the Blue Room. Excusing herself, Maya made her way through the White House corridors, reflecting on the improbable journey. From that coffee-soaked moment on Flight 2437 to this historic day, the Secretary greeted her warmly. "Magnificent speech, Captain. But I didn't call you here for congratulations. I called you because we've been discussing your future. Sir, your work as Special Advisor has transformed how the military addresses discrimination, both internally and in our interactions with civilian institutions. The President and I believe you're ready for a more significant role." The Secretary outlined a new position being created: Director of the Office of Inclusive Excellence within the Department of Defense, with the rank of Brigadier General. The promotion would make Maya one of the youngest generals in the Army and place her at the forefront of military policy on equality and inclusion. "This isn't because of what happened on that flight," the Secretary emphasized. "It's because of how you've transformed that experience into institutional wisdom that strengthens our armed forces." As Maya processed this unexpected development, her phone vibrated with a message. It was from Carson Miller, still at the reception. "Turn on the news when you get a chance. Something big just broke about Barbara." Later that evening, in the privacy of her hotel room, Maya watched the breaking news story. Barbara Reynolds had given her first full interview to a major network. Unlike her previous defensive appearances, this interview showed a woman who had undergone significant reflection. "I spent months angry at Captain Johnson for what I lost," Barbara explained on screen. "My job, my reputation, my sense of self. It took intensive therapy for me to understand that my losses were the consequence of my actions, not her response to them." The interviewer pressed her. "Are you acknowledging that your treatment of Captain Johnson was racially motivated?" Barbara's discomfort was visible, but she did not deflect. "Yes," she admitted finally. "I carried biases I didn't want to acknowledge. I treated black passengers differently, especially those I perceived as being out of place in first class. I told myself it wasn't about race, but the evidence of my pattern is undeniable." The interviewer asked if Barbara had a message for Maya. "I don't presume to deserve her forgiveness," Barbara replied, "but I want Captain Johnson to know that her stand forced me to confront truths about myself I had spent a lifetime avoiding. My journey isn't complete, but it's genuine. And while it doesn't erase what I did, perhaps it means her courage created change not just in systems, but in individuals like me." Maya turned off the television, her emotions complex. Barbara's acknowledgement didn't undo the harm caused, but it represented the most personal kind of accountability, the recognition of one's own prejudice and the commitment to change. It was a private victory alongside the public ones celebrated at the White House that day. The following morning, Maya called her mother before heading to the Pentagon for her first meeting about the new position. "Did you see Barbara's interview?" Sandra asked immediately. "I did." "What do you think?" Maya considered carefully. "I think transformation happens in both systems and souls, Mom, and both kinds are necessary." "Are you going to contact her?" "Not now," Maya decided. "Her journey is her own just as mine is mine. Our paths intersected for a reason, but they don't need to remain connected. Sandra hummed agreement. You know, when you were little and faced discrimination at school, I worried constantly about how to protect you in a world that wouldn't always see your worth. I never imagined you'd end up changing that world instead. I haven't changed the world, Mom, Maya demurred. I just refused to accept disrespect in one moment, and that moment connected with something larger. That's how all change happens, Sandra insisted. One person, one moment, one stand at a time. As Maya prepared to leave for the Pentagon, she paused before the mirror to straighten her uniform. The coffee-stained uniform from Flight 2437 now hung in a special display at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, alongside other artifacts from pivotal moments in the ongoing struggle for equality. Her current uniform gleamed with the insignia of her rank and the medals earned through her service. But Maya understood that its true power came not from the authority it represented, but from the principles it embodied, the commitment to protect the dignity and rights of all Americans, including the right to be treated with respect regardless of race. Outside her hotel, a young black girl recognized her from news coverage and approached shyly with her mother. "Are you Captain Johnson?" the child asked, eyes wide. Maya knelt to the girl's level, just as she had done with another child in the airport a year earlier. "I am. What's your name?" "Zoe. I want to be a soldier like you when I grow up." "The uniform is important," Maya told her, "but what matters most is remembering that your dignity is non-negotiable, whether you're wearing a uniform or not." As Maya continued to the waiting car, she reflected on the unlikely chain of events that had transformed a coffee spill into legislation, a moment of discrimination into a movement for accountability, and her individual stand into a collective awakening. The journey had never been about one flight attendant or one airline or even one incident. It had been about the fundamental American promise that all people deserve equal dignity, and the ongoing work of making that promise real in daily life. Maya Johnson had boarded Flight 2437 as a decorated soldier en route to receive recognition for her service in combat. She had emerged as a different kind of warrior, one whose battlefield was not foreign terrain but the landscape of American institutions and the persistent challenge of building a society where dignity was truly non-negotiable for all. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like Carson did? Has Maya's story inspired you to think differently about standing up for yourself or others? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and justice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that. Their dignity is non-negotiable. Thank you for joining me for this journey. May we all find the courage to make that one call when it matters most. Maya Johnson's journey teaches us that dignity is indeed non-negotiable. When faced with discrimination, her decision to stand firm rather than accept injustice created ripples far beyond that single flight. This story reminds us that systemic change often begins with one person refusing to accept the unacceptable. The power of documentation cannot be overstated. Carson's quick thinking to record the incident transformed a potentially dismissed complaint into undeniable evidence. In today's world, technology gives witnesses powerful tools to establish truth. Barbara's evolution demonstrates that accountability can lead to personal growth. While consequences were necessary, her eventual acknowledgement of her biases shows that confronting discrimination can transform perpetrators as well as systems. Perhaps most importantly, this story illustrates how institutions often protect discriminatory behavior until forced to change. Real progress requires both courageous individuals and responsive systems working together to ensure dignity for all. Remember Sandra Johnson's wisdom: dignity is your birthright. No uniform, title, or achievement should be required for a person to be treated with basic human respect. Has there been a moment in your life when you witnessed discrimination but weren't sure whether to speak up? What would you have done in Carson's position? Record the incident, intervene directly, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If Maya's courage inspired you, please hit that like button to help more people discover her powerful story. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of ordinary people showing extraordinary courage in the face of injustice. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their dignity is non-negotiable, Share this video with them today. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Maya's experience. May we all find the courage to make that one call when it matters most.